The rain poured over the alien marketplace, the streets glowing with a reflection of neon signs. Shadows moved between the stalls. Traders shouting their last calls for the night. Evan, a tall human with a worn jacket, walked quickly through the crowd, trying to disappear into the noise. Behind him, the sound of hurried footsteps followed. "Wait." A voice called, sharp and desperate. He turned his head slightly and saw Hurlira, the alien girl he had pulled out of trouble earlier. Her skin had a soft silver hue, her eyes bright like molten gold. But they were wide with something he knew. "Welfare!" She ran up to him. But as she reached him, her voice rose in anger. "I don't need you," she shouted, the words echoing off the metal walls of the market. People turned to look, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Evan froze for a second, confused. If she didn't need him, why had she followed him all this way? He shook his head and turned away, deciding it was her problem now. But as he took 2 steps forward, something happened. Small but strong hands grabbed the back of his jacket, clutching tightly. Evan stopped, feeling the pull. "Let go," he said, his voice calm but firm. She didn't answer. Her grip only tightened, her claws pressing into the leather. Evan turned, and what he saw in her eyes made his chest tighten. She wasn't angry, not really. She was terrified. Her lips trembled, as if she wanted to speak, but couldn't. Then he noticed the reason across the marketplace. Standing still in the rain was a tall figure. The man, or at least something shaped like a man, watched them without moving. His face was hidden under a hood, but the glint of metal under his cloak was clear. A weapon. Evan's soldier instincts kicked in immediately. "Who is that?" Evan asked, keeping his voice low. Lyra shook her head quickly, not looking at him. Instead, she pressed herself closer, as if trying to hide behind his body. The hooded figure began to walk toward them, slow and deliberate. Evan glanced around. The crowd was thinning as the rain grew heavier. The noise of the market faded, leaving the sound of footsteps in water. He could tell the man's eyes were locked on Lyra. "This isn't my fight," Evan muttered, more to himself than to her. But her claws dug deeper. She was holding on to him like he was the only thing between her and death. That feeling, he had seen it before in war. It was the look of someone who had been hunted for a long time. The man's pace quickened. Evan didn't have time to think. "Come on," he said, grabbing her wrist and pulling her into the nearest side alley. Lyra didn't resist. She followed him, her breathing quick and uneven. The alley was narrow and smelled of damp metal and engine oil. Their footsteps splashed through puddles as they ran. Behind them, the sound of the pursuer's boots grew louder. Evan's mind was already mapping the streets, looking for an escape. "Why is he after you?" Evan asked. "He's not the only one," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They'll never stop." Evan frowned. "They? Who's they?" But before she could answer, a bright flash lit the alley wall. A blaster shot sizzled past them, hitting a pipe, steam bursting out with a hiss. Evan didn't look back. He grabbed Lyra's arm tighter and pushed her forward. They turned a corner and ducked behind a pile of old cargo crates. The rain pounded above them, masking the sound of their breathing for a moment. Evan thought they might have lost him, but then the sound of slow footsteps echoed again, closer this time. The hunter wasn't rushing. He knew they had nowhere to run. Lyra's grip on Evan's jacket didn't loosen. Her golden eyes met his, full of fear and something else, trust. Evan sighed under his breath. He had a rule to stay out of other people's problems. But some rules were made to be broken. The footsteps stopped just beyond the crates. Evan reached for the small sidearm hidden under his jacket. The next move would decide if they lived to see morning. The sound of boots splashing in puddles grew louder. Evan's hand rested on his sidearm, ready to move if the hunter came closer. Lyra's claws were still hooked into his jacket. Her breathing fast and uneven, she whispered something under her breath. But the rain drowned it out without warning. The hunter stepped around the crates, a hooded shadow in the dim glow of the alley's flickering lights. His face was still hidden, but Evan caught the glint of cold steel in his hand. The man didn't speak, he just started moving toward them. Slow and certain, Evan knew this kind of predator, the type that believed the prey had nowhere left to run. Well, he wasn't about to prove him right. "Stay close," Evan muttered, pulling Lyra with him as he darted down the alley. The narrow passage twisted like a maze, steam hissed from broken pipes. Shadows leaped across the walls as neon signs flickered overhead. Behind them, the footsteps followed. Quickening, Lyra stumbled once, but Evan caught her by the arm and pulled her forward. She kept whispering, "They won't stop, they won't stop." Over and over, Evan wanted answers, but right now, survival came first. A flash of light seared past his head, another blaster shot. The beam burned a hole into the wall beside them, spraying dust into the air. They burst out of the alley into a wider street. This part of the city was quieter. The stalls closed, doors sealed shut. Rainwater streamed down the sloped road, turning it into a shallow river. Evan's boots splashed as he ran, pulling Lyra. Behind him, suddenly, another shadow appeared ahead. A second pursuer, stepping out from a doorway. He raised his weapon, blocking their path. Evan's eyes darted left and saw an open doorway with a faint red light inside. "In here," he said, shoving Lyra through before the second man could fire. They stumbled into what looked like an abandoned electronics shop. Dusty shelves, broken screens, and tangled wires filled the room. The rain outside pounded harder, masking their movements for a moment. Evan ducked behind the counter with Lyra. Through the cracked window, he saw the two hunters meet in the street. They spoke in low voices. One gesturing toward the shop. "They know we're in here," Evan whispered. Lyra's golden eyes flickered. With panic, "They're not alone," she said quietly. "There will be more soon." Evan felt his jaw tighten. Whoever these people were, they were organized. A sudden crash came from the back of the shop. Evan spun around, weapon ready. A third pursuer kicked open the rear door, water dripping from his coat. The man raised his blaster, but Evan fired first. The shot hitting the wall inches from his target's head. The hunter ducked back out. But now the rear exit was compromised. "Move," Evan ordered, pulling Lyra toward a narrow hallway at the side. The hall was dark and smelled of damp wood. An oil at the end was a rusted staircase leading down. They clattered down the steps into a storage room. The air was thick with dust. Old shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes and crates. Evan found a heavy steel door at the far side. He tried to handle it, was stiff, but unlocked. They stepped into a service tunnel barely wide enough for two people. Dim red emergency. Lights glowed along the walls. Their footsteps echoed on the wet concrete floor. Behind them, they could still hear faint shouts. "Where does this go?" Evan asked. Lyra shook her head. "I don't know. I've only ever run. I've never made it this far." Her voice cracked on the last words. Evan didn't reply. But he felt her grip on his arm tighten. The tunnel twisted and turned. Sometimes they passed rusted doors. Sometimes they stepped over broken pipes. At one point, they found a large grate in the floor, steam rising from it. Evan stopped, listening. The sound of boots in the tunnel behind them was getting louder again. "Keep going," he said, pushing her forward, but as they rounded another corner, Evan saw something ahead that made him stop. A fourth pursuer stood at the far end of the tunnel. Blocking their way, his weapon was already raised. Evan's mind raced. Behind them, hunters closing in. Ahead, another armed threat. He glanced at Lyra. She didn't look away. Her eyes said she knew this might be the end of the road. But then she whispered, "I know a way out. If you trust me." The part ends with Lyra pulling him toward a small almost invisible opening in the tunnel wall. Evan hesitated for half a heartbeat. Then he followed her in, just as the hunter's footsteps thundered closer. The narrow gap in the wall was just big enough for them to squeeze through. The stones scraped against Evan's shoulders as he pushed forward. Lyra moved quickly, her small frame slipping into the darkness ahead. Behind them, the sound of boots in the tunnel echoed like a drumbeat. They emerged into a cramped maintenance shaft. Pipes ran along the walls, dripping cold water. The air smelled of rust and old machinery. Evan could barely stand upright, but at least they were hidden. Lyra crouched by a corner, listening. The hunter's footsteps faded, replaced by distant shouting. "They think we kept going down the tunnel," she whispered, her voice trembling. Evan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "All right," he said. "You're going to tell me what's going on?" Lyra hesitated, her golden eyes darting toward the floor. "You wouldn't believe me," she murmured. "Try me," Evan replied, his voice steady. She pulled back her sleeve. On her forearm, just above the wrist, was a small metal disc. Embedded into her skin, it had strange markings, a faint red light blinking slowly. "This is how they find me," she said, touching it with her clawed fingers. Evan frowned. "A tracker." She nodded. "Not just a tracker. It's proof." "Of what I was?" Evan raised an eyebrow. "What you were." Lyra's voice dropped even lower. "A test subject." The words hung in the cold air. She told him how she had been taken when she was just a child. How scientists, both alien and human, had worked together in secret. They had run experiments, testing her abilities, her endurance, even her mind. They said I wasn't a person. "Just a project," she said, her voice shaking. Evan's hands clenched into fists. She explained that she had escaped weeks ago, but the tracker meant she was never truly free. "They send hunters after me, always. Different faces, same orders." Evan studied her carefully. "So why follow me? Why cling to me like that back there?" Lyra's eyes softened. "Because you didn't look at me like they do." She glanced away, ashamed. "And because I thought if you stayed, maybe I'd have a chance." He remembered her shouting, "I don't need you," in the marketplace. It made sense now. She had been pushing him away to protect him. Evan let out a slow breath. "You're right about one thing," he said. "This isn't going to stop until that tracker's gone." Before she could answer, a distant metallic bang echoed through the shaft. Both their heads turned. They found the way in. Evan said quietly. Lyra's claws tightened around his sleeve again. They moved quickly, crawling through the maintenance shaft until they reached a rusted hatch. Evan forced it open, the hinges. Groaning, they slipped into a storage room lit by a single flickering bulb. Stacks of old crates and barrels filled the space. Dust swirling in the air, Evan walked to the far wall. "Checking for another exit. Locked," he muttered, eyeing a heavy steel door. Lyra paced nervously, her eyes darting to the hatch they had come through. Muffled voices were already drifting closer. Evan turned back to her. "I can remove the tracker, but it's going to hurt." Lyra's breath caught. "If it means they can't find me again, do it," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. Evan pulled a combat knife from his belt. He crouched in front of her. "This will be quick, but you can't make a sound." She bit her lip and nodded. He worked fast, slicing carefully around the metal disc. Lyra's claws dug into the floor, her body trembling, the faint blinking. Light grew faster as if it knew it was about to be destroyed. With one final push, the tracker popped free, falling into Evan's palm before he could crush it. A voice called from the hatch, "They're in here." Evan dropped the tracker onto the floor and stomped on it, the metal shattering. The blinking light went dark. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then the storage room door rattled as someone tried to force it open. Evan looked at Lyra. "Time." To go, they shoved a crate against the hatch to block it. Then moved toward the opposite wall. A small ventilation duct was their only way out. Evan boosted Lyra up first, then followed. Behind them, the door burst open. The hunters pouring into the room, but by the time they looked around, Evan and Lyra were gone, crawling through the narrow duct into the unknown. The narrow duct rattled with every movement. Evan's elbows scraped the metal as he crawled. His eyes fixed on the faint light ahead. Lyra moved quickly, her breath coming in short bursts. Behind them, the muffled sounds of boots and shouting grew faint. But not far enough. They reached the end of the duct and dropped into a dim corridor. Lined with old pipes, it looked abandoned. The walls stained with rust and damp patches. The air was cold, carrying the smell of oil and dust. Lyra landed lightly, but Evan hit the ground with a heavy thud. "We can't keep running forever," Evan said, checking his weapon. Lyra glanced at him, her golden eyes tense. "What do you mean?" "They know the tunnels better than us," Evan replied. "Sooner or later, they'll trap us." Her claws flexed nervously. "Then, what do we do?" Evan looked around, spotting a heavy sliding door half open to their left. He peered inside it. It was a large maintenance hall, empty except for scattered tools, crates, and a row of old machines. "This will do," he said. Stepping inside, Lyra followed. Still scanning the shadows, Evan moved quickly, pushing crates into place, setting them as cover. He found a half-empty fuel can and poured a line across the floor near the door. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, making sure they regret coming through that door. He said with a faint smirk, minutes later. The sound of boots echoed in the corridor outside. The hunters had found them. Evan crouched behind a crate, his blaster ready. Lyra crouched beside him, her breathing shallow but steady. The first shadow appeared in the doorway. Evan waited until the hunter stepped inside. Then fired. The shot struck the man's weapon, sending it clattering to the floor. Lyra reacted fast, leaping forward and kicking the weapon into the shadows. More hunters rushed in, their weapons glowing in the dim light. Blaster shots ripped through the air, sparks flying as they hit metal. Evan ducked, returned fire, and rolled to another crate. Lyra grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and swung it at an attacker who got too close. One of the hunters stepped into the fuel line without noticing. Evan fired at a loose wire hanging above it. The sparks ignited the fuel. Flames roared across the floor. Forcing the attackers back, the heat lit up the hall, casting long shadows on the walls. But the leader of the hunters was smarter. He kicked over a nearby crate to block the flames, then advanced with a heavy shield. "Stay behind me," Evan called, firing at the shield. The shots bounced off harmlessly. The leader reached cover and tossed a smoke grenade. Thick gray clouds filled the hall, cutting off their vision. Evan coughed, trying to keep track of Lyra in the haze. He felt her hand on his jacket, staying close. A shape moved in the smoke, too tall to be Lyra. Evan swung his weapon up and fired. The shot hit the attacker's shoulder, sending him stumbling back. But another one came from the side, nearly tackling Evan to the ground. Lyra's claws flashed in the smoke. Slashing at the attacker's arm, the man cried out, dropping his weapon. Evan shoved him away and pulled Lyra back toward the rear of the hall. The air was thick, the sound of footsteps all around. "We need to get out now," Lyra shouted. Evan spotted a service ladder against the far wall. "This way," he called, pushing her toward it. She climbed fast, her movements quick and sure. Evan fired a few last shots to cover her before following up the ladder. The hunters fired after them, but the smoke and flames blocked their aim. They reached a hatch at the top. Evan shoved it open. Cold night air rushed in. They climbed out onto a rain-slick rooftop. The city stretched out in all directions. Neon lights glowing in the mist. Below, the sounds of the fight echoed faintly. Evan slammed the hatch shut and locked it. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing hard. Lyra looked at him. Her voice quiet but firm. You didn't have to fight for me. Evan shook his head. I did. The wind tugged at their clothes as they turned to find a way across the rooftops. Behind them, the hatch rattled. Someone was trying to force it open again. Evan knew this wasn't over yet. But for now, they had a small head start, and in his mind, he was already planning their next move. The rooftop was slippery under their boots. Rainwater ran in thin streams toward the edge, glistening under the glow of the city lights. Evan led the way, scanning the horizon for a safe path. Lyra stayed close behind, her claws gripping the wet surface for balance. They crossed to the next building using a narrow metal bridge. The wind howled between the structures, pulling at their coats. Lyra glanced back and saw the hatch on the maintenance hall burst open. Dark shapes climbed onto the roof, the hunters back on their trail. Evan spotted a small warehouse ahead, its skylight half open. This way, he said, pulling Lyra toward it. They slipped inside and landed on a dusty catwalk overlooking stacks of crates. The smell of old wood and rust filled the air. For the first time since the chase began, there was silence. Only the soft patter of rain on the metal roof. Evan crouched against the railing, checking his weapon. Lyra sat down on a crate, her shoulders rising and falling with each breath. You've been running a long time, Evan said, his voice calm. Lyra looked at him, then nodded slowly. It's all I've ever done since I escaped, she whispered. No home, no friends, no safe place. Just moving, hiding, surviving. Evan studied her for a moment. She was too young to have gone through so much. You're safe for now, he said, though he wasn't sure how long that would be true. Lyra's gaze softened. Why? Are you helping me? Evan leaned back against the railing, his eyes distant. I've seen too many people left behind because no one wanted the trouble, he said. Lyra tilted her head. You lost someone. He nodded. A whole squad silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain. Finally, Lyra spoke again, her voice quieter. I didn't want you to get hurt. That's why I shouted at you earlier. Evan gave a small smile. Didn't work. Her lips curved slightly, a flicker of warmth in her expression. They sat like that for a while. Two strangers bound together by danger. Lyra's claws tapped lightly against the crate as she thought. Then she said, if I ever make it out of this, I want to know what it feels like to stop running. Evan didn't answer right away, but he reached into his coat and pulled out a small emergency beacon. This is a COM device, he said, placing it in her hand. If we get separated, turn it on. I'll find you. Her golden eyes met his, searching for any sign of hesitation. Instead, she found something steady, something that told her he meant every word. She closed her claws around the device and nodded. Then I'll hold on to it, she said softly. A sudden noise broke the moment, a faint creak from the far end of the warehouse. Evan was on his feet instantly, his weapon raised. Lyra slipped behind a stack of crates, ready to move. Shadows shifted in the gloom, followed by the glint of metal. They found us, Evan muttered. The hunters moved carefully, their steps quiet on the wooden floor. Evan glanced at Lyra. This time, we don't run, he said. She gave a sharp nod, her claws flexed, her body low like a predator ready to strike. Evan positioned himself near the entrance, using the crates as cover. As the first hunter stepped into the light, Evan fired. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Lyra sprang from the shadows, tackling another hunter before he could aim. Her claws slashed across his weapon, sending it skidding across the floor. Evan covered her from a distance, each shot precise and controlled. The hunters fired back, splinters flying from the crates. Evan ducked, returning fire when he saw an opening. Lyra moved with agility, using the stacks of crates for cover. Together, They drove the attackers back toward the entrance. When the last one retreated, Evan locked the warehouse doors. He leaned against the wall. Catching his breath, Lyra approached him slowly, her eyes still bright with the rush of the fight. "You fight like you've done this all your life," she said. Evan gave a small shrug. "In a way, I have." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You know? You don't have to stay with me," she said. Though her voice made it clear she didn't want him to leave. Evan looked at her, his expression firm. "Yeah, I do." She didn't answer, but she didn't need to, because in that moment, they both understood this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, and maybe, just maybe, about something more. The warehouse was silent again, but Evan knew it wouldn't last. The hunters would regroup, and next time they would come in greater numbers. He paced between the crates, scanning the building for anything they could use. Lyra watched him, her golden eyes following every movement. "They'll be back soon," she said quietly. Evan nodded. "That's why we make this our ground." Lyra tilted her head. "Our ground." He met her gaze. "We stop running, we fight here, and we make sure they don't get up again." She hesitated for a moment, then gave a sharp nod. "What do you need me to do?" Evan pointed toward a pile of old machinery in the corner. "Help me set traps, anything that slows them down." They worked quickly. Evan tied steel cables between crates to trip their attackers. Lyra stacked loose boxes in unstable piles, ready to crash down on anyone who pushed through. They found rusted fuel canisters, and Evan placed them near the doors as a last resort. Outside, the rain eased into a steady drizzle. The sound of boots crunching on wet ground carried through the walls. Lyra froze, her claws tapping nervously against a crate. "They're coming," she whispered. Evan checked his blaster, the power cells fully charged. He handed Lyra a short metal pipe. She took it without complaint, holding it like she had used such weapons before. "Stay behind cover until they're close," Evan said, then hit hard. The first impact shook the warehouse doors. The second nearly broke them. Evan crouched low, his weapon aimed. The third strike sent the doors swinging open with a loud crash. The hunters flooded in, their armor glinting under the dim lights. Evan fired immediately, his shots finding their marks. A hunter tried to rush him, but tripped over one of the cables. Before he could recover, Lyra was on him, slamming the pipe into his helmet. More attackers poured in from the side windows. Evan rolled behind a crate, firing at their legs to slow them. One of the unstable box stacks collapsed, pinning two hunters under the heavy weight. Lyra moved fast, dodging blaster fire and striking at weapons, forcing them from enemy hands. The leader appeared at the doorway, shield in one hand, heavy rifle in the other. He advanced slowly. Pushing through the chaos, Evan fired at the shield to no effect. The leader's voice echoed through the warehouse. "You can't win, human, Evans." Lips curved into a small smirk. "We'll see." He fired at one of the fuel canisters. The shot piercing the metal, flames erupted, spreading across the floor. The hunters panicked. Some retreating, others trapped by the fire. The leader didn't stop. He charged through the flames. Swinging his shield, the impact knocked Evan to the floor, his blaster skidding away before the leader could fire. Lyra leaped at him from the side, claws digging into the gaps in his armor. He roared in pain, swinging wildly, but she held on. Evan scrambled to his feet, grabbing a broken metal rod from the ground. He drove it hard into the leader's side, forcing him to stumble. Lyra jumped clear, as Evan followed with a solid strike to the helmet. The leader fell to his knees, then collapsed completely. The remaining hunters froze, seeing their commander down. One by one, they backed away, retreating into the night. The flames died slowly, leaving the warehouse smelling of smoke and burnt metal. Evan stood, breathing hard, his clothes singed. Lyra approached him, her silver skin glistening with sweat and rain. You could have left when it got bad. She said softly. Evan shook his head. I told you, this is our ground. For the first time since they met, her lips curved into a real smile. The two of them stood in the quiet aftermath. Outside, the night was still, but Evan knew it. Wouldn't stay that way for long. Somewhere out there, more enemies were regrouping. But for now, they had survived, and they had done it together. The warehouse was quiet now. The smell of smoke still lingered. Mixing with the damp scent of rain drifting through the broken doors, Evan stood near the center of the room, his shoulders tense. His eyes scanning the shadows. Lyra sat on a crate. Nearby, clutching the small cum device he had given her earlier. They'll come again, she said softly. Evan nodded. Yes, but not tonight. Her golden eyes watched him, searching for something. You don't have to keep protecting me. You've already done more than anyone else ever would, she whispered. Evan shook his head. I'm not leaving you out here for them to find. Lyra's claws tapped lightly against the crate. If you stay, you'll be hunted too. I've been hunted before, he said, his tone steady. She tilted her head, but this time, it's because of me. Evan walked over and crouched in front of her. From the moment you grabbed my back in that market, I became part of this, he said. You didn't let go. And I'm not letting go now. Her lips trembled, but she didn't look away. Outside, faint sirens echoed in the distant security forces sweeping through the district. Evan knew it wouldn't take long for someone to report the fight. They had to move, but first, a decision had to be made. Lyra, he said quietly, I can take you somewhere safe, but once we go, there's no turning back. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Safe. Is there such a place for someone like me? Evan leaned back. There is if we make it. She stared at him for a long moment, then asked, why? Why risk yourself for me? He didn't answer right away, but when he did, his voice was firm. Because you're not just someone running for her life, you're someone worth fighting for. The words seemed to freeze her for a second. Then she stood, her claws flexing nervously. I told you before, I don't need you, she said quietly. Evan's brow furrowed slightly. But before he could respond, she stepped forward and grabbed his jacket. Her voice broke as she added, but I want you to stay. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then it settled, he said. They began gathering what little they could carry, supplies, a spare weapon, and a few tools from the crates. Evan kept glancing toward the broken doors, listening for movement. When they stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the glow of scattered neon signs. The city felt different, quieter. As if holding its breath, Lyra stayed close, her steps matching his. Halfway down the street, a shadow moved in the alley to their left. Evan tensed, ready to draw his weapon. But it was only a street cat, darting into the darkness. He let out a slow breath. Even so, his instinct screamed to keep moving. They reached the edge of the industrial district. Beyond it lay the transport docks. If they could reach a cargo freighter heading off-world, they might escape, but getting there meant crossing open ground. Evan scanned the rooftops, the alleys, every possible angle. Stay behind me, he told Lyra. She nodded, her eyes sharp now. No longer just afraid, but ready. They moved quickly, their boots splashing through shallow puddles. Each step felt like a countdown. When they reached the dock gates, a security drone hovered down to scan them. Evan tensed. But the drone's light flickered before shutting off entirely. Lyra looked at him in confusion. Old trick, he said with a grin. Sometimes tech listens to the right kind of lies. They boarded a small freighter bound for a distant colony. Inside, the hum of the engines was steady, almost soothing. Lyra sat near the window, watching the city lights fade. Evan sat across from her, keeping his weapon within reach. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lyra finally said, I thought I'd always be running. Evan leaned forward, You still might be, but now you won't be alone. Her golden eyes met his, and she gave a slow nod. As the freighter lifted into the clouds, the city disappeared beneath them for the first time. Alira's claws weren't gripping his jacket, but she didn't. Need to, he was already there, and she knew, deep down, he wasn't letting go. Not now, not ever.